morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And thanks for bearing with me as we have a tiny technical glitch, but I'm sure we're going to get it all worked out. So I am the author of Hiring Product Managers, using product EQ to go beyond culture and skills. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to just share with you a couple of things, key pieces and takeaways from the book. I'm going to talk about this concept of product EQ. It's in the title, but what is it really? Why is it important? And how can we help it change the way that we all think about hiring, especially for you and your teams and your organizations, as we're all doing a lot of product management hiring these days. And the next slide, you'll see that one of the most important things, I think, from my takeaway as a consultant over the last 10 years. So I've been an independent product consultant for about a decade now, and I work with product organizations of all shapes and sizes all over the world. And it's been a fantastic experience. One of my main takeaways is that what we do in product management, it's not just a job, it's not just a career, it's really a practice. Kind of like how a doctor might practice medicine or a lawyer might practice law, we in product management have this like amazing virtual toolbox of tools and techniques that we use to try to figure out some really complex problems. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? But at the end of the day, it takes a lot of practice. And if you break down this concept of product practice, in my mind, it's made of two distinct areas, distinct but connected, as you'll see, technical skills and human skills. And technical skills are very much what we do. Human skills are how we do the work. And on the next slide, you'll see a bit more context as to what I mean about that. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So technical skills, what work is done? Things like product roadmaps, vision statements, OKRs and KPIs, design sprints, all the things that really, as we say in America, are the bread and butter of product management. These are the essential tools and techniques, really, that kind of create the foundation of the work that we do as product management, what work is done. But then there's the human skill side, how the work is done, right? And that includes things like influence, leadership, active learning, resilience, adaptability, creativity, dealing with conflict, and emotional intelligence. And on the next slide, you'll see that I want to spend just a minute on emotional intelligence, because I think it's a concept that we kind of talk about in general, but I want to make sure that we're kind of on the same page as far as a definition goes for the rest of the talk today. So emotional intelligence is defined by the Institute for Health and Human Potential as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions, and recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. And Daniel Goldman, who is a journalist and psychologist and author who really made this concept of emotional intelligence more popular in his book in the 1990s, says that emotional intelligence is made up of 4 competencies within it: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And you'll see all kinds of skills within these different competencies. Many I'm sure we're aware of. Emotional self-awareness, emotional self-control, organizational awareness, empathy, collaboration, teamwork, coaching and mentoring, conflict management. So these are crucial elements of human skills, right? How we do our work. And on the next slide, we'll talk about actually how, well, I say there's 2 distinct parts of a balanced product practice. They really do work in harmony. They're interconnected. So for example, if you want to do something as fundamental as building a roadmap, a fundamental technical skill in product management, you have to have the human skills to do it, right? It's not just all about what technique are you going to use for the roadmap, what format, are you doing it by outcomes, are you doing it by theme or patterns, whatever kind of software you're using. It's about the human skills, right? It's about having self-awareness to be able to raise your hand and say like, all right, maybe the thing I'm really pushing for in the roadmap is something that's out of my own best interest and not the best interest of my team or my organization or my customer. It's about having the influence skills, bring those really challenging stakeholders along with you. It's about having leadership skills to make sure your team is aligned on the vision for the roadmap. It's also about having conflict resolution skills, because we always know there's going to be some kind of tension when it comes to putting a roadmap together. And on the next slide, you'll see that while this concept of human skills and the balanced product practice is so important, at least in my mind, a lot of what we talk about today in our product blogs and our podcasts, even at a lot of our conferences, is more on the technical skills side, right? We really double down on content and focus and conversation and dialogue around what are product roadmaps, how to set great OKRs, how to build the perfect MVP and what is an MVP, how to do great A/B testing. And in the next slide, you'll see that, well, this is really, those are our key aspects. There's so much research out there that shows the power and the importance of human skills and how it can have a great impact on us as individuals, as teams, and organizations. And this data is not specific to product, but I'd say neither is kind of the whole concept of human skills. It's broader than us, but that's what makes it even more important to bring into our regular conversations. So for example, there's data that shows that individuals with higher levels of EQ, which is your measurement of emotional intelligence, EQ is your emotional quotient, they tend to make more money than other people in similar roles with lower levels of EQ. A few years ago, when this data was and survey and research was done, it was about $29,000 a year more. So something tells me that number's probably gotten a bit bigger. And then if you look to the right, you see a bit of information about empathy. So organizations with higher levels of empathy, which is a key human skill, a key aspect of emotional intelligence, actually have greater overall performance because they learn at a faster rate. Therefore, they innovate at a faster rate. And then down below, you'll see some information about high-performing teams. And research shows that there's a direct correlation between high-performing teams and teams with high self-awareness. And yeah, you can even measure self-awareness in a team. So teams with higher self-awareness tend to make better decisions, they coordinate their work better, and they deal with conflict better. They are higher performing. And then on the next slide, well, all this is great, right? And I say very passionately that human skills and emotion intelligence is hugely important in the work that we do. The conversation, as I've already mentioned, is also really, really focused on technical skills within the product community. So my goal, my campaign, is to actually help us kind of reframe the narrative in product management about what is success in product management. How do we build this balanced product practice and move the needle from one that is overwhelmingly focused on technical skills to one that incorporates human skills and makes it more of a balanced conversation. And we'll go ahead to the next one. And that's where this idea of product EQ comes from, which is in the title of my book. It's this campaign, it's this focus on bringing human skills and thinking about things like self-awareness, thinking about things like resilience and leadership into conversations about product management. And I decided a good first step, the next slide you'll see, is thinking about hiring product people. I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed when I've done a lot of hiring for product people in the past, that we tend to very much focus on the technical skills when it comes to our criteria and pedigree. So pedigree is basically where somebody went to school, maybe where they live now, who they know, where they've worked in the past. Maybe a specific focus on a technology or a customer, instead of actually bringing in some thinking and focus on the human skill side of what a candidate could bring to a team and an organization. So that's why I've started this process and this focus on, let's break down some key ways that we can actually make it easy to bring human skills into our hiring process. And before we jump into those, on the next slide, you'll see again why it's so important that we focus on hiring overall, because when we do make mistakes with our hiring, which happens a lot, it's really costly emotionally and financially. So this is just some of the basic data. So turnover costs. So when somebody leaves a role and an organization has to replace the role, that can cost about 120 to 200% of that initial person's annual salary. So it's very expensive to replace someone when they leave an organization. And it takes a long time for employees to kind of get up and running, right? You don't just kind of land and get going. It takes time to learn the organization, the product, the customer. In general, it can take about 13 months for a new person to come in and to really reach kind of a level of maximum efficiency in a team and an organization. And what I found most interesting is that when employees leave, and there was some great research done that shows when employees do leave, the reason they leave is not because they're lacking a technical skill, right? It's because there's something missing within the human skill side. So we're going to talk about 3 things that you can do to hire for human skills when you're looking to hire for product people. And the first one is to actually build a role that matters. If you go to the next slide, please. And you can go ahead to the next slide after that as well. There we go. So building a role that matters. So what do I mean by this? So when I was a young kind of hustling head of product, I remember when I would get new headcount, it was kind of like Christmas Day came early, right? I could find someone to take over a lot of the work that I was done doing or wasn't as interested in anymore, and could bring in somebody to kind of work with and kind of and continue that focus on those pieces. And what I would do is I'd go back and I'd sit with my laptop and I'd do some like online research. I go to some like Google and Amazon and Microsoft and see how some of the best practice industry folks are talking about product management. And then I'd also go look at some competitors and I'd cut and paste what I saw and put together kind of a hodgepodge of a job description. And I found out in doing research for my book that I wasn't alone in doing that. A survey found that while 80% of hiring managers think job descriptions are really important, about 50% of us cut and paste them together. And you usually end up with something pretty traditional like this: must-haves at the top, nice-to-haves at the bottom. And this is actually a job description that I found when I was doing research for my book. And it's for an e-commerce product manager. So think somebody probably kind of mid-level within their product career. And just looking at it for a second, you can see under the must-have. So this person, this role must have proven work experience in B2C product management, must have proven track record in managing all aspects of a product lifecycle, must have the proven ability to develop marketing product strategies and communicate that to executives. And it would be great if you also had a solid technical background. So if you just think about those 4 bullet points and the message that they perhaps send to a candidate, they tell you, if I was a candidate, I would read that and think, okay, so this organization is maybe not a growth and learning organization. This is an organization where I have to go and improve myself from day one. What kind of message does that send a candidate? What does that say about your organization? And then if we go into the nice to haves, the first bullet point, I'd say in at least 70% of all product management job descriptions is it'd be great if you were comfortable with ambiguity. So I know we're cutting and pasting job descriptions from each other because everybody's got that one, just about everybody. So we want you to remain unfazed when you have to do things you've never done before. It's a pretty ambiguous line in itself, if you ask me. And then it goes on to say, we'd like you to be a natural born leader, which I want you to remember that this is for an e-commerce product management role. And I don't know anybody at that level or beyond really who could actually say they're a natural born leader. You know, they just kind of come out of the womb, ready to go, ready to lead, no training, no coaching, no reading, no nothing, just ready to go. And it goes on to say, we'd really like you to be anti-fragile and really detail oriented. So when I take a look at this job description altogether, I see something that probably didn't have a lot of deep thought behind it. Instead, it's kind of put something together that sounds impressive, but that's looking for a candidate that probably doesn't exist. It's not realistic. In fact, it's quite fantastical. And if you look on the next slide, you'll see what I think they're really looking for. I think they're really looking for a unicorn, something that really, a candidate that's just not there. So instead, on the next slide, you'll see what I propose and what I use with my candidate or with my clients is something called a role canvas. And the role canvas has 4 simple questions. Excuse me, just a quick drink of water. 4 questions that help you and your team really identify what you're looking for in a candidate. So those 4 questions, and they seem really simple, but there's a lot of weight behind them. So the first question is the purpose. What's the purpose of the role? Why does the role exist? This is not the job title, right? It needs to go deeper than that. Why does this role exist? What will this role be accountable for is the next question. What are the goals and outcomes that the role is working towards? And then the next section, human skills and technical skills, ask you and your team to list out what are the different aspects, what are the different skills of human skills and technical skills that this candidate would really need to be able to achieve their accountabilities. What's essential? And this is actually a great time for you and your team to actually put some learning about human skills into action. One of the teams that I worked with early on when using the role canvas just wrote down emotional intelligence in human skills. And that's not good enough. This is a time to be a bit more challenging. As you saw in the earlier slide, there's a lot of things behind emotional intelligence. What are you going after? What do you really need in this role? Maybe your team has had a lot of problems with conflict lately, and you need somebody who's going to be good at dealing with conflict and be able to resolve conflict. So that might be at the top of your list. So make your list, prioritize them, and really have a good conversation around what this role is going to, or you need this role to be. You can do the role canvas on your own if you're a hiring manager and then bring it to a team for conversation, or do what I often do, which is do it in a workshop setting. You can go to my website and download a version of this to use with your team. Or if you happen to be face-to-face, you can just kind of print it out and put it up on a wall. The idea is to have a conversation and to answer these questions and to work through them together before you create a job description, and definitely before you start interviewing. So that's the first thing that you can do to start to bring human skills into the way that you're thinking about hiring for product people. Sit down with your team, dig into a role canvas. Really do spend some time on answering these questions that seem really simple, but once you start to have the conversation, you'll see that the fruit of the conversations is going to produce something much better than cutting and pasting a job description would. The second thing that you can do on the next slide is prepare meaningful questions for the interview. So you've got a job description together, you've got people coming in for interviews. What are you going to talk to them about? What are you going to ask them? And in the next slide, you'll see some of the questions that I used to ask. I remember when I was interviewing people, again, when I was that young hustling head of product, about 5 minutes before an interview, I'd go back into Google and I do a search for those brain teaser questions, right? Because I wanted to have those tricky questions that probably threw somebody off a bit and, made them kind of fumble and get a bit nervous. I'm not sure why I thought this was so cool, but at the end of the day, these type of questions were often my go-to when creating or when stepping into an interview. So for example, which do you think has more advertising potential in Boston, a flower shop or a funeral home? In the next slide, you'll see that there's another example of a brain teaser question. Yep, next slide, please. Great. Design an evacuation plan for the building. So as you can kind of start to think through these questions, I think the one thing that you will get out of asking brain teaser questions is how does somebody handle ambiguity? So if that is something that you're really going after and you really want to test for, throw them a question like this. But instead, I recommend, in the next slide, you'll see behavioral-based interview questions, which are actually some of the most highest validity in interview questions, according to a lot of research out there, to help you understand how somebody might have behaved in the past in a work situation and how they may behave going forward. To really understand the connection between those human skills that you've identified in a role canvas and how the candidate would actually maybe embody them when they do work with you, if you do select them and they select you as well. So let me give you an example. On the next slide, you'll see a behavior-based interview question for conflict resolution. So as I mentioned in the role canvas, let's say that your team has decided that you really need to find somebody that's good with conflict and can help the team move forward. So you could ask them another really simple question. Tell me about a time when you suggested something that someone disagreed with. What did you say? How did you handle the situation? Very basic questions, not meant to trick, not meant to throw anybody off, just meant to help you understand how somebody might have behaved in the situation in the past, to get an inkling as to how they may behave in a similar situation going forward. There's another question on the next slide that we can share as well. Have you ever encountered someone at work who is unreasonable? What did you say? I don't know about you guys, but I find these kinds of situations happen all the time. I'm challenged on my recommendations all the time. There could be conflict that comes out of that. How have I resolved that in the past? To give you an idea of how I may resolve that going forward. One thing that we need to keep in mind and note though, is that, we are humans. We do have the ability to change. So when you're asking these questions to somebody to hear a story about how they may have reacted in the past, you may also get a glimpse of how they would like to handle it different going forward, okay? So there's not always a direct tie between the response to one of these questions and how somebody may apply that behavior again in the future. They may have actually had a chance to learn and they want to change that behavior, and that can come through in their answer as well. And the next slide, you'll see that in asking behavior-based questions, the onus on getting a lot out of these questions is actually on the person who's interviewing, right? The interviewer, so you, the hiring manager. It's up to you to really listen to the response, listen to the narrative that they're sharing with you, and really try to pull from their story how something as intangible as conflict resolution may become tangible. So for example, it's not just listening to a story and sitting back and then like kind of letting your mind wander onto other things you've got to do today, but follow up, probe, dig into their story, find out, do they engage with conflict? If they do, how do they engage with conflict? Is it something that they want everybody to be a winner, or they want a winner and loser? And then how are these responses going to actually fit in with your organization and help power your organization going forward to create the teams that you need and the organization that you need to deliver on products? So in the next slide, you'll see if you are interested in picking up more behavior-based questions around these different components of emotional intelligence. I've just mentioned two from conflict resolution, but this book has amazing questions about everything from how you could get a better understanding of how empathetic somebody is, to the kind of leader they could be, to how resilient they might be. It's a great book to pick up if you want to start to bring in behavior-based questions into your interview process and really start looking for human skills in the questions that you ask. So the third and final thing that I want to mention about how you could bring human skills further into your hiring process is take the ability to reflect and respond along the way. On the next slide, you'll see what I often see with my clients when I first start working with them. This is actually a traditional product hiring process that a client drew out for me. When I asked, what does their hiring look like? How do they do it? And it starts with the job description and it ends with the offer, right? It's a linear process. And when I see something like this, my first question to my client is usually, when's the last time you did anything in product management that was linear? It just doesn't happen, right? As we all know, we iterate, we learn. It's much more of a cyclical process. So on the next slide, you'll see some different recommendations that I make in the book about how to actually kind of disrupt this idea of hiring being a linear process and actually creating a continuous learning loop through your hiring process. So one of the things I talk about is this concept of calibration meetings, which is an opportunity, a scheduled opportunity for you and your hiring team, whoever it might be, other members of your team, recruiters, stakeholders, whoever it is, to come together on a regular basis, maybe bi-weekly basis, maybe weekly basis at first, to take a step back and compare notes on how things are going with your interviewing, how things are going with your hiring process overall. In a way, it's kind of like a mini retro, throughout the hiring process. Where do we need to change? Where do we need to kind of create some different interviewing questions? Where do we need to think about our job description again and go back to the role canvas and maybe tweak it? Because there's been some changes in the organization, there's been some changes in the market, and we need to refit and reconfigure that role overall. So it's making a practice of actually setting time aside, planning ahead that we will come back as a hiring team to revisit where we are so far and what changes we need to make. Reminding ourselves this is not linear, okay? There's also a concept in the book that I talk about called the role retro. And the role retro is the idea that after somebody has taken the job, they're onboarded, they're off and running, for you, the hiring team, and that person who's taken the role on to come in and have a retro about, say, 3 or 6 months down the line. And it's not a retro about how that person's performing, right? That's a different conversation that should be happening more on a regular basis. This is more about how did we do with the role? Did we get it right? What changes should we have made? What didn't we account for? How can we learn from this role and actually make it make the next role we create even better? So it's a learning opportunity specifically focused on the role itself. Going back and taking out that role canvas that you used and saying, how do we do? What did we miss? What changes do we want to make? One other thing that I've seen teams do to start to kind of really measure and focus on the importance of hiring decisions is taking a note off of Jack Welch's book. And Jack Welch was, of course, the CEO of GE for quite some time. And he was very focused on his organization making good hiring decisions. And they created a metric called a hiring batting average. So, of course, taken or based off of American baseball's batting average. But what he would do is he would talk to everybody on a hiring team before a hiring decision was made and kind of take a pulse. Do you think we should move ahead? Don't you think we should move ahead? And then 6 months, 9 months, a year down the line, after that person perhaps had been brought on board, he went back and he did something like a role retro to find out how did we do. And he actually created a metric out of that to help the team understand where are they with hiring decisions and how they could get even better at them. So on the next slide, you'll see that what this all equates to, the 3 different things that I've mentioned in terms of how you could change your hiring process and make it more human skills focused, is a loop in itself, a continuous learning loop in itself, right? You build a role that matters. You're using a role description, not just copying and pasting job descriptions from the internet. You evaluate for human skills in your interviews with behavior-based interview questions, and you reflect and respond along the way. You don't just charge through a linear hiring process. You stop and reflect. And by you stopping and reflecting, you as a team and as an individual are also learning a really important skill of awareness and reflection. That's a baseline for any sort of human skill and human or in personal development within product management or within life in general. On the next slide, you'll see the one thing, I'm really sorry the animation's not working on this today, but the one thing that I need to leave you with, of course, is if you are interested in hiring for human skills and bringing that into your team and your organization, you really need to have them yourself, right? You can't see human skills like self-awareness or resilience or even leadership unless you have it. So within even something as typical that we do as hiring and product management, it's an opportunity for personal growth. It's an opportunity for personal development. And that's where I think the magic can really come in, from something as baseline as how we hire. It can create an opportunity for you to change, transform, and that has a magical impact on your team and your organization as well. So I hope that with this conversation today, you'll see that human skills are important. And in order to actually get them going and create a better focus on them, you can start with you. And the next slide, this, of course, is just the start of the conversation. The book is available on Amazon, in all markets. It's gotten some great comments from Marty Kagan and Martin Erickson and other folks. And if you want to stay in touch with me, please do. On the next slide, you'll see a few things that I'm doing around human skills in my own practice. If you could go to the next slide, please. Maybe, there we go. So I have a leadership coaching program for product people that you can find out more about on my website. I also do coaching in-house with organizations and leadership teams. And I'll soon be offering a masterclass on empathy for leaders and how to really, why it's important and how to create more empathetic relationships, and presence in the organization. You can find all of that on my website. And on the next slide, you'll see my Twitter handle and other ways to stay in touch. So I really hope you will stay in touch. And I'm looking forward to hearing any questions you might have. Thank you. And thanks to the person who's powering the slides behind the scenes.